Hello everyone, you're listening to You Got It with Warrior Woman 91. Alright, so this episode is more of just me yakking and talking and just telling you guys what I think, because I have a lot of things that I like to talk about. And I'm sitting here eating popcorn, so you will hear me chewing and crunching on popcorn throughout this entire episode. So lucky for you, you get to listen to this. I do hope that people enjoyed the last couple of episodes. I actually brought on some guests like I did with the old show. And I know people really enjoyed having the guests on, getting to see a lot of us interact and communicate with each other in person. I'm sure you've seen us talking online, so it's really fun to see these people get together in person, or at least listen to them talk in person, kind of like what Joe Rogan does, or even Ben Shapiro's Sunday Special. Which, by the way, I was watching the Joe Rogan episode with Ben, the most recent one, this morning, and it was interesting. It got me riled up about a few issues. I would like to debate all of those issues. I can't help myself. But anyway, so I was ranting on my Instagram story, and you guys can go back and watch that for a little bit more context, but I was ranting on my Instagram story about Wicked Witches and why I really love the Wizard of Oz books. And one of the reasons, in between my crunching on the popcorn, is the villains from the Wizard of Oz are actually villains, and they don't try to make you sympathize with them. Like, everybody knows the Wicked Witch of the West, and nobody feels sorry for her in the actual movie. The only time that you start feeling sorry for her is when they take the Wicked Witch of the West and they put her in a musical called Wicked, and they're like, oh, and she just had a hard time, and then there's Once Upon a Time, which takes the Wicked Witch of the West and distills her down into this red-headed, doe-eyed idiot that just wants to be loved and is jealous of her younger sister that got everything, and it's just pathetic, okay? I want a real, actual villain who's actually wicked and not just wearing the name because she's, thinks it makes her cool or something. I don't know. I apologize. There's an airport not far from where I live, and so you're going to probably hear some, helicopter sounds or something. They're not actually coming for me, okay? Everything's fine. So, that's what I was talking about on Instagram. There's multiple witches in The Wizard of Oz. I know everybody thinks of the Wicked Witch of the West and Glinda, the Good Witch of the North in the movie. In the 1939 movie, she's of the North. In the actual book, Glinda is the Good Witch of the South. There are actually 4 witches, because there's North, South, East, and West. And so there are 4 witches in the original book, one of which gets destroyed by Dorothy when the house drops on her. The Good Witch of the North is actually, I think, and I need to go back and read that book. I haven't read The Wizard of Oz since I was about 9 years old, so I can't recall exactly her description. But as I recall, I think she's a little bit older. The Good Witch of the South is this young, they call her a sorceress, actually. They don't call her a witch, they call her a sorceress. But she's like Power Woman. She's what the left ever, is always talking about, the strong female character. That's Glinda. But as I was discussing in another podcast recently, it's important to have these strong female characters that actually have. This is the reason why they're strong, is because they actually have problems to overcome. What the left would rather you had, and what Disney would rather you had, specifically, is these female characters that are completely Mary Sue's. They can do no wrong. They're perfect in every way. They're Mary Poppins characters. They have no foibles to overcome. They're blank slates. They're hard to relate to because they're perfect. Rey from Star Wars is a great example. Rose from Star Wars is a great example. There's so many different examples, especially from Star Wars, especially from Disney, especially with even. I don't want to rip on Captain Marvel too much because her character does have those powers, but her personality, she didn't have a whole lot to overcome. She didn't have a lot of depth there going on in that movie. There's a lot of characters that you have these issues with, and it's unfortunate. So that's why you look to Wizard of Oz, which, by the way, feminists, it was written by a man. Oh my gosh, what? It was written by a man with Glinda, the Good Witch of the South, also known as the Sorceress, and she actually has a limitations to her powers that she has to overcome. So in the second book, she's actually got a little bit more of an active role. Let me run through the first book real quick. It happens along at a much slower pace than the movie, but the actual gist of the movie is roughly the same. Of the book as compared to the 1939 movie is roughly the same, I should say. So you've got Dorothy whisked away by a tornado, lands her house on a witch in Munchkin Land, and is told by the Munchkins and by Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, that she has to go and see the wizard on the Yellow Brick Road in order to get herself home. So that's the gist of the first book. Same deal. The difference between the two books, the two gravest differences. Number one, she wears silver slippers, not ruby. They changed them to ruby because they thought it would sell better in the movie. But it's actually silver slippers. And the second crucial difference is that at the end of the movie, when the wizard accidentally flies away and leaves her behind, she actually is not greeted by Glinda there. She is told by, I forget who tells her, but she has to go actually travel to the south to find the Good Witch of the South. So that means another trek. So the book is significantly longer than the movie. Obviously they couldn't fit all this in the tiny space of time that they had, but she actually has to travel to the south. She goes on another smaller adventure to the south and goes through a couple other different obstacles that are really quite fascinating. I would highly recommend reading it. I'm going to be rereading it shortly. But when she gets to the south, she interacts with Glinda, and all Glinda really says is essentially what she says in the movie is, "You were wearing your ticket home the entire time. You have these shoes, and they will take you home." She's like, "Oh well, I went through all that now." So she goes. So Dorothy is whisked away, and that's how the book ends. Similar to the movie, it's a lot longer, and there's a lot more fun elements to it, and a lot more character development of the other guys as well. So, hang on for the popcorn chewing. My coworkers used to get so mad at me for talking with my mouth full, but I just can't stop talking. Anyway. Second book starts with all new characters. So the second book, there's two sets of separate books, okay? So there's the series that L. Frank Baum wrote. That starts with the Marvelous Land of Oz, goes into the Ozma of Oz, and so on and so forth. There's a series of sequels of books that L. Frank Baum wrote. And then there's also another sequel that was a movie that was filmed in the 1980s, came out in the 1980s, and that's called Return to Oz. Return to Oz, the movie, and then subsequent book that came with it, is a combination of stories told in the L. Frank Baum sequels, but it's not an actual retelling. It's an entire new story, but based off of things that happened in the books that L. Frank Baum wrote. What I'm talking about today is the books that he actually wrote, because I could do an entire separate episode on Return to Oz, because despite the fact that it's kind of tampering with, it's tampering with material from the author, and I usually hate it when people do that. It's actually really, really well done. It's actually a phenomenal movie. It's one of my favorite movies. I almost like it more than the original Wizard of Oz, and that is sacrilege, but I'm saying it now. So you got The Marvelous Land of Oz is the first book that follows the Wizard of Oz, and it tells the story of a boy named Tip and his adventures in Oz. And there's another witch in that story who has him kept as a slave, and she's actually scary. She's actually an old hag and a witch, and she threatens him at the beginning of the book and is going to make him drink this potion. First, she wants him to sit there and watch her make the potion and help her make the potion, and then she's going to go to sleep, wake up in the morning, and then make him drink the potion in order to turn him to stone. There's no backstory on her. There's nothing other than she's just an old hag and likes experimenting on children, apparently. And it's quite I mean, it is, like I said, it's a children's book, and if you're looking at this from a kid's perspective, you're thinking, yeah, that's pretty scary. I don't like this lady. There's none of this, oh, we have to feel sorry for her. Oh, this is the reason why she feels this way. And that's, I guess that's the point. This is what I was talking about in my Instagram story, my little rant that was going down about that, is I like to have villains that are actually developed villains, but villains that are just villains at the end of the day. There's a certain time and a certain place for anti-heroes, which is the villain that you feel sorry for that sometimes does good things and sometimes is redeemable. That's fine. That's like Loki in the Avengers, because he starts out as a good guy and he becomes a villain. He becomes the ultimate villain, and then he turns around. He's one of those villains that you wish wasn't a villain, but part of the appeal is that he's a villain, which makes him an anti-hero. It's very complicated, but that's a good example of somebody who's classically an anti-hero because he's never on the good side, but he's also never 100% on the bad side either. That's a good use of anti-hero there. But when you have these ultimate villains that you have to fight, I don't need to feel sorry for them. You're not supposed to feel sorry for the villain. I just get tired of the backstory and this and that. There's a time and a place for the sad story, but I don't think I don't think it's useful in every story to have that. I think it does damage to the original quality of the story when the villain all of a sudden turns into be this redeemable character. It's kind of like what they did in Once Upon a Time with Regina. She was a phenomenal villain in the first season. Absolutely phenomenal. And then they complete the original premise of the story in the first season, and they basically ruined their show by doing that. By having Emma, spoiler alert, the show's been out for 10 years? Almost 10 years? It's been out for a while. The main character breaks the curse at the end of season 1. The curse, which was the premise for the first episode at the beginning of the show, when the show premiered. She breaks the curse at the end of season 1, and then what do you do with the villain? What do you do with the villain now? Do you hang her by the neck until dead? Well, they had to figure out how to keep her in the show and what to do with her. So they decided, okay, we're gonna put her on this path to redemption. And so basically, as I haven't finished the entire show, but I kind of pretty much know how it ends. Basically, for the next 6 seasons, they go on this trek to redeem Regina's character. Regina being the Wicked Queen from Snow White, of course, and they ruin her. They ruin her character. Like, the evil queen is supposed to be the evil queen. She's not supposed to be this sobbing, terrible, like, even, like, the backstory that they gave her in season 1 was actually pretty good. It still does a little bit of damage to the character because it makes her sympathetic, and I don't want to sympathize with her. Now, to a certain extent, I will give them credit. It was well executed in season 1, and I don't mind the backstory so much. It makes it interesting. I do think it does damage to the integrity of the original story. Every time you give the villain a backstory, then it's like, oh, it's an excuse to. It makes bad behavior okay. If I'm just treated badly enough, then it's okay if I do this terrible thing. It never is okay. It's never okay. There's never a good enough excuse. I guess I just get frustrated with this. Well, because this thing, it makes it, it's understandable, and it's a trap that I fall myself into occasionally at times. I'm not saying that I'm, perfect human being that has never fallen into this trap. But when it comes to the purpose of storytelling, I want there to be, with a villain, there needs to be a clear good versus evil kind of an arc. That's not in every story. That's just in the type of story that I'm reading. It's kind of like Hunger Games had a clear villain. President Snow was a clear villain. President Snow was also supposed to be a caricature of George W. Bush, which I don't get by any stretch of the imagination. But he was still that character was a clear villain. The character it's a great in Lord of the Rings had a clear villain, and Sauron does have a backstory, but he's also just a terrible bad guy all the time. It's a good you need to have these solid foundations of good versus evil. This is the bad guy. This is the good guy. This is the anti-hero. Gollum is an anti-hero because he's never a good guy, but he's not always a bad guy either. So I guess we just need to redefine the boundaries here. There's the good guys. There's the kind of good guys. There's the anti-heroes. I guess you could call them anti-villains. The good guys that sometimes do bad things, but then those are still technically good guys because the good guys still, in order for them to be well written and well developed characters, they need to have foibles. They need to have things that make them stumble. Otherwise, they're not realistic. Otherwise, they're not relatable, and you can't understand where they're coming from. All right, I've been riffing for a good solid, 5 minutes. I don't know. But I just wanted to get that off my chest. Great stories have to have heroes, have to have villains. Love anti-heroes. They're some of the most compelling characters. But you need to actually have villains. You can't sacrifice your villains at the expense of having only anti-heroes. If all you ever have is anti-heroes, then there isn't a compelling case for me to watch your movie. I think that's one of the problems with Thor: The Dark World is it never actually had a clear villain. It had obstacles, like the Dark Elves were like an obstacle to trip over, but then their main villain was Loki, who isn't a villain, he's an anti-hero, and he was set up to be an anti-hero, which is fine, he's a great anti-hero, but then it fell off because there's nothing that they're fighting against. They're fighting, there's nothing of substance, I should say, that they're fighting against. They were fighting against, the Dark Elves or something that had no development, and everybody was like, who are these people that have no personality and speak another language that nobody understands? And how many people are actually reading the captions at the bottom of the screen? Unless you're sitting in a movie theater and everything is quiet and you're not on your phone, because by the time those captions came on the phone or came on the screen, I was definitely looking at my phone. Nobody has a clue what's going on. You have to have a villain. You have to have a well-developed villain. You had a little bit of a villain in Ragnarok with Hela, with a decent amount of backstory, but that didn't really make you feel too bad for her because she was kind of a spoiled brat. You still, there was weaknesses with that villain, for sure, but that's what I'm talking about. The difference between, if you look between Thor: The Dark World and Thor: Ragnarok, no villain, nothing real to fight against in Thor: The Dark World. Nothing of value was really lost there because Loki never dies. Every time that they kill him off, he's not dead. Although Thor did lose his mother, but that was the only moment of real loss that they had in the movie. And then the rest of it was just oh my gosh, and now we're going to do this chase scene, and we're going to have Lego Marvel 3, and so we can play this chase scene. I'm going on so many rants. I just have to say, so many of these movies now seem to be making scenes, CGI-driven scenes, because they know they're going to be a children's video game later on, and this is going to be a level. So there's a scene in Star Wars The Last Jedi, where some of the main characters go to this planet, this casino planet, and you look at it, and it's set up so that it can be a level on Lego Star Wars or something. It's set up just for that, and so that there can be a chase scene that you have to do, and a pod race scene, and this and that. Ah! You guys, make the good movie first, and then make the video game later. The original Star Wars movies were not made for video games, and they've made fantastic video games since then, based on a compelling story. I don't even know how we got on this subject. The overarching theme of this episode is make a solid story, make believable villains, make compelling characters, make me care. When I go into a movie and when I read a book, my first question is, why should I care about this? Well, why do I care about The Wizard of Oz? What made me read The Wizard of Oz? Originally, when I first started reading The Wizard of Oz, I was 9 years old, and it was assigned to me in school to read the first 3 chapters of the abridged version of The Wizard of Oz. I was required to read those 3 chapters, and then I was done with the assignment. I read the first 3 chapters, and then I immediately ran to find the book. And so I went to the library, 9 years old, and grabbed that book at 3 o'clock. And I remember this was a big deal. This was the first time I ever binge read anything. I got that book at 3 o'clock, and I started reading. And I read all the way through dinner. I read through the entire evening, and this was the latest that I ever stayed up as a kid. Was 10 o'clock was when I finished that book. I read starting at chapter 4 all the way to the end of that book, which is not a short read. My cat's crying in the background. I'm so sorry. Pop, come here. Not a short read. I finished the entire book because I cared about it. I cared what happened. I cared what happened to these characters because they were set up and it was a compelling story. And there was a clear villain that they had to fight. And the clear villain is the cat that's crying in the bathroom. Pop, come here. All right. So I think I need to wrap this up because I've just been talking forever. And when I just do these episodes that are just me ranting, I kind of try to keep it to a little bit of a shorter episode. I know you guys are more interested probably in hearing what people that are not me have to say when I have the guests on. It is a lot of fun to have the guests on. I really appreciate everybody who's come on so far and everybody who's going to come on. I do have to give a little bit of a notice. There's going to be hopefully some episodes that are not very political. I know I talked about this a little bit in the first episode, and the last 2 episodes have been fairly. They've had political discussions, but the topics have usually been things like movies and what did you think about that, or Twitter censorship or stuff like that. Politics are going to seep into these discussions here and there, but I am looking into doing more episodes that have to do with fun things, quite frankly, things that have to do with the movies you watch, the workouts you do, the things you like to eat, stuff like that. I want to have more discussions along those lines because I think that politics has just kind of seeped in and spoiled things a little bit and made it so that we can't talk about things that we actually... The whole point of politics is that we want to defend our own turf, essentially, and I want to actually enjoy the turf a little bit. So that's kind of what we're going to be delving into a little bit more in this show and with the upcoming episodes. And so I hope everybody enjoys that. I don't really have any shout-outs right now on Twitter. Shoot. Well, how about... I'm just going to throw out at Harry1T6, Harry Kachatrian. Still a great follow from Canada. Still a good friend of mine. I still need to go and visit him in Canada. Hopefully that happens within the next year or so. But go give him a follow on Twitter. He's really entertaining. He has some interesting takes on Star Wars and movies. He's also big into movies as well. So give him a follow. Hopefully I'll have him back on the show. And I will, that'll be it then. I will see you guys next time or talk to you next time. I literally have no idea how to end this show. You have no idea how many times I'm re-recording the ending of every show. So I'm just going to say, arrivederci.